dragging his broken leg behind him. A dying black bear enters a village to ask for help. What happens next is totally unbelievable. Grandma. Grandma. Come quickly, little Noah Stedman, all of 7 years old, was so excited he was practically jumping up and down on the spot. Bev, his grandmother, was less inclined to take the latest emergency seriously. It had been an exhaustingly busy morning, jam-packed with exciting discoveries. So far, there had been a frog, a squashed-up old tin that he had dug up in the garden, Mr. Monkey's roaming tomcat, and a chameleon on a tree branch. It wasn't his fault that she was pushing 70 and didn't have the energy to match his youthful enthusiasm. But what Noah said next made her drop her spatula. "You must see this. There's a bear in the road." The town of Lakeside was located in a rural community bordering a few small holdings, leading to a tract of public land that was popular with hikers. But despite this proximity to a forested area, the townsfolk seldom saw much wildlife in winter. Deer sometimes wandered into yards looking for food, but that was it. The arrival of a bear, as announced by Noah Stedman, was a rare event. Beverly Stedman wiped her hands and followed her diminutive guide through the front door and onto the grass-covered sidewalk. There said Noah with a hint of smug satisfaction, "See, I told you. There's the bear." It was a good thing that Bev had grabbed her glasses on the way out, because she would not have seen the bear without them. "You've got really good eyesight, Noah," she told her grandson. "Can we go closer? I want to see what he's doing." "Okay," said Bev, although it was probably sensible to be cautious. She was as curious as Noah about this most unusual visitor to the streets of Lakeside. "But you've got to stay with me, okay? Noah, it's a wild animal, and we don't know what he's up to." "I bet he's got a really good reason for coming here," Noah predicted, and as it turned out, the boy was 100% correct. The bear had a heartbreaking reason for coming into town. Bev Stedman took Noah's hand, and together they walked past the corner of Bev's yard and all the way down the breadth of the next 3 yards. Then Noah stopped abruptly. "Why is he doing that?" Grandma the boy asked. "Why is he walking so funny?" But Bev's hand went to her mouth in shock. This was no ordinary stray bear, she realized. Then she saw he was injured. That was clear from the way the animal dragged his rear leg along the ground behind him. But that wasn't the only alarming thing about the bear. From his dejected posture, it seemed obvious that this was a creature who had lost all hope in his own survival. Most likely, he was being driven insane by pain and starvation from his inability to feed and care for himself, so much so that he had entered the village to beg for help. In that moment, something flipped in Bev Stedman's mind, and she lost whatever fear she might have had of the bear. Watching the massive creature wobbling unsteadily, struggling to keep his balance on front paws that were already buckling with exhaustion, was heart-wrenching. She quickened her pace. Behind her, Noah was tugging on her arm, pleading, "No, Grandma, what if the bear gets you?" "He won't," Bev replied with absolute certainty. "Don't you see? He's hurt. We must help him." Then she thought of something else. She had an important task for Noah. Bending down to his ear, she whispered to her grandson, "Go quickly. Go get Grandma's phone, it's in the kitchen." Noah turned and dashed back to the house with enviable speed. Stedman heard the sound of her front door closing behind him, but what happened next demanded her full attention. The bear tried to pull itself up for a moment, but then his weary limbs refused to comply any further. With a heavy thud, the massive creature fell down, shifting inelegantly onto his side. He gave one pain-filled squeal, and his head dropped onto the tarmac. For a moment, Bev Stedman feared that he had died right there, and dreaded having to explain this to Noah when he came back. But then, to her relief, she noticed that the fur-covered chest was still moving. The bear was still breathing, still alive. But for how long? Fearlessly, Beverly approached the large bear that lay immobile in the middle of the street. She wanted to get a closer look to assess the nature of his injuries. Although she had no specialized veterinary knowledge, she had grown up around animals on a dairy farm and trusted her observational skills in that regard. She had almost reached the black bear when a new problem presented itself. The streets of Lakeside were normally quiet, especially in the middle of the day, but now abruptly a delivery van had turned into the street and was rapidly approaching the prone bear. If Bev didn't do something quickly, the wounded bear would be hit from behind. "Grandma! Grandma!" Lookout Noah came running out of breath, shouting. Bev raised her arms and shouted at the top of her voice, "Stop! Stop! Stop!" At the back of her mind, Bev thought, "I'll get us all killed like this." But then the delivery van came to a stop near the yard from the bear. The driver got out and walked toward the animal. He was visibly shocked. "Oh, hooah," he said. "I almost drove over that. Thanks for stopping me. Do you know what killed it?" Noah's youthful eyes went wide. "Is he dead, Grandma? Did he die?" "No," said Bev. "He's not dead." "Then we can save him," Noah wanted to know. "I hope so," Bev said, daring the delivery man not to contradict her. But he surprised Bev with a useful suggestion. "I'm on my way to Witt Street," he told her, "and my delivery is right by the police station, just across from it. I'll get the sheriff to send someone here." Bev had been planning to call 911, but now she dialed another number on the phone Noah brought her. As soon as she got a response, she spoke quickly, describing the situation to the person on the other end. That person could hardly believe what he was hearing. Doctor. Thomas Moore was a small-town vet whose usual calls of business represented routine procedures and complaints such as skin allergies, geriatric dogs with arthritis, pet sterilizations, and occasionally a call-out to attend a horse with colic. He had been serving the community for over 20 years, and over that period he had acquired a certain degree of confidence in his knowledge and his abilities. But today he would be called on to face the severest challenge of his career. In a way, he had been expecting the call and preparing for it. Earlier in the morning, one of his regular clients, a woman who ran a riding barn, called him about an injured bear. Whenever her riders noticed one off their trails, Doctor. Moore called a colleague who sometimes volunteered at a wildlife sanctuary, who agreed to check out the location where the bear had been sighted. But when he arrived, the bear was no longer anywhere to be seen. Dr. Moore and his friend had a good look around, but the animal in question appeared to have vanished, so the two men assumed that it must have been a false alarm. But the rumor of the injured bear refused to die down. He reported that it was dragging one of its legs. He called it in, but then the bear was gone again. It seemed like a phantom, or perhaps it was trying to lie low, because of its vulnerability and its injuries. Now, finally, Dr. Thomas Moore had a confirmed location for the bear, but from the report it appeared that the bear was now so weak that it was unable to stand. As he gathered his equipment and some tranquilizers, Dr. Moore reflected on how unprepared he was for the situation at hand. But once he arrived at the scene, something unbelievable would happen. While Bev Stedman and her grandson Noah waited for help to arrive, Dr. Moore's neighbors joined them in their vigil of guarding the dying bear. Someone had actually parked his truck across the road to keep traffic away. One grumpy old man, Old Frank, declared, "This is a death watch, the poor brute is dying as we speak," but no one else wanted to admit to the possibility that he could be right. Bev squeezed little Noah's hand as she willed that faint flicker of life representing the bear's breathing to continue. But then, as they watched, something happened that infused them all with new hope for the black bear's survival. Darlene Martin, a woman who lived opposite Bev, had brought a squeezed container of honey and, holding it towards the bear's muzzle, drizzled some of the sticky sweetness into his mouth. The bear licked its chops and then opened his eyes in surprise. He gazed up at the circle of people who surrounded him protectively and then licked his lips again. Darlene Martin drizzled more honey. The bear appeared to be reviving. With a grunt, he lifted his head, flailing his two uninjured paws in a desperate but ultimately futile attempt to get upright. "We need to help him up," a man named Bill said. No, someone else argued. "He needs to be kept still." But before a decision could be made, a new arrival took charge of the scene. Bev Stedman was not surprised to see Sheriff Pat Walton getting out of his squad car. He was very much a hands-on officer, but he was not alone. Following in his wake was Dr. Thomas Moore, the community's senior veterinary practitioner. Many of the townsfolk who had gathered to help remained on the scene. Dr. Thomas Moore was keenly aware of their intense scrutiny as he prepared a sedative. Here, he faced his first hurdle. Under normal circumstances, Dr. Moore always took the precaution of first weighing the animal he was treating to calculate the best dosage. But with the bear, it would be an impossible feat unless he used a completely different system. Dr. Moore had read that researchers used a sliding scale that enabled them to calculate the weight of an animal by measuring its chest girth. He looked across the crowd of onlookers until he spotted Jeff Monkley, a dedicated woodworking enthusiast. Dr. Moore took the man aside and explained what he needed. Monkley nodded and sprinted up the road. Moments later he was back with a tape measure. Dr. Moore emitted a sigh of relief, took the device, and bent down over the bear. The dosage he administered was still an estimate he had to compensate for the animal's weakened state, but once the black bear was unconscious, he was able to make a full examination of its injuries. Dr. Moore discovered that the bear had suffered a fracture in 2 different places, and his trek towards the streets of Lakeside had exacerbated the damage. Additionally, his other limbs had also been impacted by his temporary disability, and there was a nasty wound that had become infected. But the animal's injuries were only part of the challenge Dr. Moore faced with his care. He really needed to get the animal to surgery, but how would that be accomplished with an animal of that size? Sheriff Pat Walton was undaunted by the challenge. "You need a horse trailer," he remarked casually. Dr. Thomas Moore knew a few horse people who owed him a favor, and within half an hour he had his trailer. Now it was time for the heavy lifting, literally. As an adult male, the black bear lying in the street was heavy, and getting him off the tarmac would require teamwork. With the help of some of the bystanders, Dr. Moore was able to move the injured bear onto a sheet of tarpaulin. Then it was 1, 2, 3 heave. The bear landed softly on a bed of straw, not that he noticed any of the excitement. Still under sedation, he slept through the entire operation. At that moment, a surprising ripple of sound drifted through the small crowd of bystanders. Someone was clapping his hands. It was Noah Stedman. Everyone smiled with relief, and several of the grown-ups joined in. They deserved applause. They had done something unusual and heroic, and it took a little boy to recognize that. Several people followed Dr. Moore and Sheriff Walton back to the surgery, where Dr. Moore sacrificed a garden area to set up a special enclosure for the bear. The wound needed cleaning and stitches, and the bear's leg needed to be set. He got to work on the treatment. When the bear woke up later in the afternoon, he was grumpy, but as Dr. Moore reported, that was actually a very good sign. It meant that the treatment had been successful and that the bear was on the road to recovery. For the next week, The bear stayed in a special enclosure at the back of Dr. Thomas Moore's veterinary practice to recuperate. He also received a surprising number of visitors and well-wishers during that week. The bear became a type of mascot for their community, a true symbol of hope and resilience. As the black bear healed and became more active, he was transferred to a wildlife sanctuary. 3 months later, he had made a complete recovery and was released back into the wild where he belonged. What a lucky bear to have stumbled into a town of kind-hearted people. As a wild animal, has it ever come to you for help? Tell us in the comments, we'd love to hear from you.